Well, thank you, first of all, Jeff, for coming humbly. And this incredible opportunity, we talked about leveraging brains in this space. The focus about, how do we take this technology and solve problems in the Black community? When talking about that, we want to make sure that we have the sharpest, most viable tools to make those changes. And there's been people who've been developing on those tools, and that can be very helpful and as an instrument of those solutions. So Jeff is, again, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna let him tell his story instead of me trying to tell the story. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, Sinclair, and really, it's an honor to be here. So thank you for inviting me to come down here. It does mean a lot. My story, I don't want to go deep back into prehistory, but I was a nerd from an early age, from the age of 8. I have been computer programming just about all my life. One of the early lessons that, as many of y'all are parents or become parents, is back in the late 80s, there were very few people who actually had computers. And I was blessed to have my father worked at a drug manufacturer, Burr's Welcome, and he brought home computers, and so I could actually tinker. So as parents, early access to that technology is so crucial to your children's development, and it really helped me get to where I am today. Growing up in North Carolina, I learned not to brag about myself, and my co-founder at my business is always telling me, dude, you can't do that. You've got to actually tell a little bit about yourself.
All right, toot that horn. All right, go ahead, toot it. Toot it, bro.
So he likes to say that I'm the Venn diagram of people who have worked directly for Satoshi, the inventor of Bitcoin, and people who have worked directly for Linus Torvalds, the inventor of Linux. The center of that Venn diagram is me, and that's it. So for over 10 years, I worked at Red Hat on the very core of this software called Linux. And if you have an Android phone, or if you use Linux in a data center, or if you drive through the streets of Washington, D.C., the traffic lights, they're all run by Linux. So there's a little bit of my code in all of those computers, millions and millions around the world. Then in 2010, on this website, Slashdot, News for Nerds, I found out about a decentralized currency. And I thought to myself, I'm a smart guy. I was sure that this is impossible. You can't decentralize. How can you, and this gets into sort of the theme of the conference is, how can you break that status quo? How can you've got these centralized institutions, these centralized computer architectures, and there's this decentralized movement. And that's really getting to my personal philosophy of just leveling the playing field. I don't want, there to be some aristocracy, some rich class. I want to be a level playing field for everyone, rich and poor alike. And decentralization was the philosophy that really pulled me in. I was a skeptic on Bitcoin, and it proved me wrong. Since it was open source, and we can talk about open source, I could look under the hood, I could study this thing and prove to myself that it was real, prove to myself that it really was decentralized. It's not someone telling me, and I'm trusting. With open source, it's just like chemistry or biology where the science is out there and you can study it yourself. You can prove to yourself that nobody's putting the shine on you, nobody is pulling the wool over your eyes. This really is a decentralized technology. So 2010, I became sort of Bitcoin developer number 3. The gray hairs on my face are really sort of the Bitcoin ride, the ups and downs as it has been. And today I run a blockchain company called Block. We work with some of the biggest banks in the world to get blockchain into the enterprise being like Fortune 100 companies, and work with the biggest banks in the world and stuff. And you see when you work with these big organizations how exclusive, the opposite of inclusive they are. How many people they exclude from their customer roles, how hard they make it to just get a flippin' bank account and to interact with the financial system. And it's like a flippin' country club. It's so exclusive that, or exclusionary, that there has to be a better way. There has to be a way to shake up that status quo and include so many more people that are excluded now. So I kind of feel like taking blockchain into these big banks is like being the one long-haired guy in the room. Is you're injecting some radicalism into these old legacy financial institutions that frankly need to be shaken up. So that's kind of why I'm here today, and that's a little bit about my story. Definitely a Bitcoin OG, if you wanna call me that.
All right, go ahead. We're going to give it a clap on OG. Look. Since we had a blockchain room, when he said banks and working with banks, I didn't know we were going to have something like booze. So there'll be no, like what Serena said, no booing. There'll be no booing on banks, right? But also, Jeff, there's so many folks in here who are makers and builders. And I think some of the early events that I was able to have the opportunity to listen to your story, you talked about the power of open source. And what does that mean for creative folks? What does it mean about changing the power dynamics? Again, in this room, we're talking about disruption, but we're actually talking about disruption like Harriet Tubman did. We think she was innovative and she changed things. We think, Honorable Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm X, these folks changed Shamora Michelle. How do we say that we want to create this new world and without talking about politics or protesting or philanthropy, but just technology, such as open source technology, how does that empower folks who may not be coming to that equation of self-determination with a whole big bank account? How do you see that role?
Sure, so a little bit of background first, just what is open source? And so I like to describe it as in basic science, you've got a chemist, a biologist. When they're doing some science, they're doing some research, one of the steps they do, they construct their hypothesis, they perform their experiments, they generate their data, peer review. They share that knowledge with another scientist to get these checks and balances of, did I perform my biology or chemistry experiment the right way? Is my methodology good? Peer review, this sharing of knowledge, but also sharing of checks and balances. I'm getting feedback from my peers about, this part of the system needs improving, this part of the system's really good, et cetera. So open source is about publishing openly, sharing knowledge openly, and with the internet, that's really leveling the playing field. You've often heard like knowledge is power. Well, in one sense, you knowing about blockchain and about Bitcoin and about private keys and the empowerment that comes from controlling your own destiny, that's one part of knowledge. The opposite or another part of knowledge is power is there are people who are information gatekeepers. They hoard knowledge, keep it away from you. And open source is about breaking through those boundaries, eliminating information gatekeepers, and spreading the knowledge as far and wide as possible. One of the earlier panelists talked about one laptop per child, which I was actually involved in some small part. It ran on Linux. And the OLPC program was an excellent example of open source in that the software to run this laptop that they wanted to get to, was it Nigeria? To get to a ton of Nigerian school kids, it was free. It was not only just free as in cost, obviously you have to make the laptop, that's not free. But the software part, it's not only free as in cost, you can download over the internet, but it's free as in speech. It's there is no information gatekeeper preventing you from having your own motivation to go out and learn this engineering, prove to yourself that it's something worthwhile, and start contributing to it. So in terms of empowering people, open source is about eliminating the gatekeepers and bringing this new meritocracy where you and your level of effort is the only barrier to gaining this knowledge and using this knowledge to really accelerate yourself, your family, your friends to a much, much higher place in, I'll call it the information ecosystem, really the world. And so open source is the foundation or the cornerstone for not just Linux, not just blockchain, but a lot of the technologies we use every day, the good and bad, the Facebooks of the world, they're built on open source, Amazon, et cetera. And but if there are some national security folks in the audience, the NSA, while I was working at Red Hat, directly contributed to building something called Security Enhanced Linux, or SE Linux. And that's a technology found in every Android phone today. And why do I feel comfortable running
that was about to
an
be scary.
NSA,
and the NSA
level
has
technology on my phone?
Right, go ahead, man.
Is the same reason I'm comfortable with Bitcoin. Is I don't trust the NSA.
Go ahead.
I don't trust them at all. I trust my skill at reading the source code. Because it's open source, I could say, screw these guys. I know my own engineering. I can prove to myself there's not like an NSA backdoor in my phone. And so that's the power of open source that it brings to you. Now, of course, sidebar, there is a NSA backdoor in all your phones, but we won't discuss that.
Needless to say. No, humbly, Jeff, I think that was helpful. Sometimes you can tell a joke, but it's giving it 100. I think another aspect of it, because you keep alluding to it, because in this space, you've been in much longer than many of us, we've seen, the need for user adoption, and it seems like the folks who get the user adoption right the most are scammers. And I think the fact that you keep alluding to the fact that we should be able to look at this, because it's open source, and figure out what's going on. We're all operating in this room at multiple levels, right? But I think fundamentally, those who are interested in seeing the growth of this space, we don't want scams. That's not helpful to us. And even though they've mastered user adoption better than those who are just like really trying to help folks or do the right way, how do we get people to look at these different projects, these different products, and do their own self-evaluation? And I want to say this because. And this is no disrespect to the room. I want the high level as well as where the goats can get it. Let me say it another way. We're in a room full of computer science specialists, and we got folks who are just brand new to it. So I don't want to dumb anything down, but I don't want somebody to think that we're trying to speak spooky or something. So if you can talk about evaluating, what we're looking at when we start talking about cryptocurrencies, blockchain, at a very high level, and then maybe something that's I might tell my mom who's super down, but just may not, get the pieces.
Well, honestly, even though I've been a programmer for many decades, I like talking at the high level, because a lot of this is about connecting people to other people, about building communities, sharing knowledge, sharing wealth, capital, et cetera. And so I would say for the grandmothers of the world, that blockchain technology it's going to be new, and in the interest of complete humbleness and honesty, it's going to be really tough at first. There are a lot of rough edges in the user interfaces and the apps that exist today, and that's one of the challenges, is making it more accessible to the average person. And it's not it's not that person's fault, it's our fault as technologists. And we need to build better user interfaces so that people can understand that you have control over your private keys, technical details, you're like, what is a private key? But the translation of that is you have control over your money. Nobody can just flip a switch and say, nope, your bank account's gone. And nobody can just say, you're not allowed to spend at this activist organization. You're not allowed to support this person and their free speech and their cause. You are in 100% complete control. And so that's incredibly empowering, that's incredibly leveling, that's bringing down people, that's lifting up people so that we're all sort of at the same level of control. Now, there's risks. If you have money under your mattress, you got to figure out, how can I keep that from my cousin who just loves to raid my bedroom every time he visits? How do you secure your own wealth? There's, like Stan Lee said, with great power comes great responsibility. That is no more true than in the Bitcoin and blockchain space, where if you lose a key, there are real monetary consequences to that. Now, there are good sides and bad sides to that, but at a very, very high level, it's the one banking technology that I've seen since the invention of money that finally gets the power back to the people and away from the people in the ivory towers who control, the bank accounts and the systems of government and stuff like this. This is truly grassroots. And so at a high level, to the non-technical folks, that would be, how I view blockchain. At a lower level, at a technical level, I would say that this is a technology that is working its way into just about every segment of life. You don't see it. I call it plumbing. Just like all the plumbing that you see, that you don't see in this building, it's there. And it's infrastructure. Blockchain is infrastructure. Now, what if you have this new infrastructure that's very empowering? It gives power back to the people who actually hold the money, control the money. That's your savings account. That type of power is amazing if you have it in your hands and you can reshape business with it. You can reshape the relationships between people, the relationships between businesses, the relationships between governments. It's that big of a deal. But how do we get that gap from this is something that can help banks and individuals and businesses talk to each other in theory? How do we get to that future? And that's the question we're trying to define now. So there's so much at the technical level that I can talk ad infinitum about multiple signatures and private keys and decentralization, and we can definitely do that. At the high level, to me, it's about giving people back the power they always should have had in today's banking system, but were denied.
Okay, and then looking towards the future, before we open up, you've been working on some projects now. Block is BLOCQ. Q. And what do you see in the future? What do you see? What's exciting you right now in this space?
I know that there's a lot of hype associated with it, and maybe I'll offend a few maximalists.
Well,
but the ICO space is really, really interesting because people and companies who would not have normally received funds are getting funded. Normally, you've got the Silicon Valley, white bro network funding white bro companies.
Well, go ahead. Now, wait a minute, John.
And that's like the path that's been beaten into the ground. Let's do something different. ICOs are funding interesting people who have interesting radical ideas, who want to change things. They want to be outside the normal money networks. And so that's one of the really, really exciting parts. Now, you rightly mentioned scams and scammers and stuff like that. We got to go into this with eyes wide open. We have to say, yeah, there are some people who are trying to part good souls from their hard-earned money, and we have to work to stop that. But on the positive side of the token, I guess pun intended, people who would not have access to the white bro networks are getting funded. Different projects that are outside the norm are getting funded. And so there's a lot of noise, a lot of hype. There's some, not good aspects to it. But at the same time, new people that never would have gotten funding before are getting funding. And I love to see that sort of activity, that creativity. People are, it's up-leveling people, to use a video game term.
All right, this time we're going to do a Q&A. We're going to take 4 people. We got.
Make sure she's next. Make sure she's next. Whatever you do, she ain't next. I don't like
My question is to you, sir. You made reference to security enhanced something from
Security Enhanced Linux, SE Linux.
Thank you.
Wow, that was an easy question. Give me some hard ones. Give me some hard ones.
All right, I got to come to this side because now let me stop.
We could bring it to the videotape. Sat here all morning. Everything came in that side. My name is Deidre McIntyre. I'm with Black People in Cryptocurrency, which is a Facebook group. My question is, because you kept alluding to it and mentioning it, what are some projects that you've seen that are not necessarily connected to you that you find very interesting in the space right now?
Is it connected to me in that I'm in blockchain and these people are in blockchain and therefore I'm excited about it? So, the whole world is connected to me from one perspective. If I see a project I'm not connected to that's awesome, I'll reach out and try to make that connection. And in general, that's what I encourage everyone in the audience to do. Network. That's how you're going to break into these networks, build your network, make it stronger. The things that get me interested, and part of the reason why I'm in this room, is that I really see that there's the one sustainable way to lift people out of poverty is economic growth. That's the one proven way. I mean, I love charity, and charity works as sort of like point fixes, but charity itself is not sustainable. Even if you get a super wealthy billionaire write you a $1 billion check, y'all might remember the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge from a year or more ago. They raised like $100 million for ALS, but that organization had no clue how to spend that money. Usually they get like $50,000, $100,000 a year, and all of a sudden they have this huge bank account. And so there was a lot of wasteful spending following that you didn't hear about because they're not prepared to deal with that sort of scale of donations. And so when I see, I think that there's a lot of opportunities specifically on the African continent to really accelerate more than other continents, areas of the world, economic growth in a sustainable way. And so when I look at what are some interesting projects, those are the interesting projects to me. Is not, can we like save 10% cost at some bank? That's totally boring. Is how can we uplift an entire freaking continent in a sustainable way such that it's not just a blip, it's we're all uplifted and we're sustaining that new level of economic prosperity. And so I think that blockchain provides a potential vector for that uplift. And so I didn't answer your question at all. I wasn't very specific, but that's really the theme, and so that's what projects make it to me.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Eden. You mentioned some financial systems that you're working on and funding and ICOs, and that's an alternative way to gain some money. But I think 70-80% of them are scams. That was the figure that came out recently. So there's a negative connotation around ICOs. And we've got millions of billions of dollars that's flowing in. And I'll give you an example. I was looking at an accelerator in Nigeria, a blockchain accelerator, funded by, ran by, led by white men in Lagos. Looked behind the funding, also other white men. And I spent a day trying to find any organization on the continent that was run by or funded by a brown person. I couldn't find one. I just gave up. So I'm seeing that we're recreating sort of the same power structures. It's very frustrating because you talk to a lot of crypto folks and they're like anarchists and they're saying all these things about anarchy and
White male anarchists with glasses.
yeah, so I'm just seeing the same things being perpetuated and happening in this same system, and it's really frustrating. So I wanted to hear from you if you had any thoughts on that, any solutions, because I feel like I'm just banging my head on the wall and I'm seeing the same thing, and I want to know if you, as someone who's inside of that system, can kind of speak on that.
Sorry, what's the system of white males? You won't tell anybody you told. I think just to give some frame of reference, with all the money being raised in the space, and there's like black folks and indigenous African, I'm in the projects we're working on, even when TechCrunch had this big like battlefield thing, the company one was like a white South African company. They had no money. And it was like, okay, wait a minute. I went all the way to
The
Africa.
only white dude in South Africa, and he won.
All the way over there. I could have stayed here for that. I was like, man, I could have saved the ticket, to go up to this thing.
Entire brown staff there, but the money actually went to a
Right, it would be like window dressing in the space.
Oh, yeah.
So we're not trying to get you to speak for all the last 500 years, but like, what the time that you know?
Yeah, don't ask me to do that. But, well, small point, big point. So the small point is we definitely need to think about, in terms of data, most startups fail. And so just universally is like, it's an astonishingly high. It's like 90%. 80, 90% of startups fail. I don't want to depress you. That's just sort of the cycle of life. And the people who are funding startups, they know that. And so they spread their bets across 10 companies. 9 of them will fail. And the one that doesn't is the one that makes all their money back, and then some. That's your famous unicorns. So in terms of percentages, you do have to say, okay, we have a 90% not good rate. What is that other 10%? Is that other 10%, either empowering or making back your buck or whatever your specific goal is? Now, the more important question is how to, black folks break in to the white bro network. Oh, it's dramatic. He's ready. He's ready for it. And with that dramatic buildup, I don't have, sadly.
No, that was on the wall by mistake.
That's right. He's like, we got to go to lunch.
It's a setup.
So more seriously, part of it is gonna be the not easy answer. It's looking to break the status quo in little ways and big ways. The big way is going to be how high profile can we have some minority entrepreneurs, some minority engineers, et cetera. Pick that specific organization and bring it up. But at the same time, you've got to. I'm an activist in a suit. You got to break the system to fix it in certain ways as well. And so that's, I think, in part, you got to break the system to fix it. And so I think that disruption of these networks is a positive. I think that I don't have any. Here's the next step to fix this shit. Fix this stuff tomorrow. But at the same time, I don't think that just playing by the rules and following the status quo is going to get you where you need to be.
All right, last 2 questions.
Hi, my name is Danielle Sidnor from Cleveland, and just to kind of follow up on that question, you called yourself an OG, so what responsibility, though, does a white male have to integrate in your network and call your own brothers out and say, you got to do better? Because it's one thing to say, we have to just disrupt, but it's another thing for a power structure to intentionally call out their own folks and say, you got to do better, too.
No, I think you absolutely have to do that. I think that, and I fall short in many regards, and that as well. But I think that part of what we have to do is to reach out to events like this and pull people into the system and get you inside the fence, and that's a huge step in and of itself. Yep.
Last question.
Hey, there you go. And to blatantly be selfish and have a plug for my company, Block, we're hiring. And one of the key problems in my business every single day is finding people who know blockchain, because all the other Bitcoin OGs are, they're basically independently wealthy and they don't have to work. And so how do you find skilled engineers who have a passion, they're hungry, they want to work? If you fit that bill, come talk to me after the talk, because I'm hiring and I'm getting people inside the fence.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Bryant. I live here in Washington, D.C. So you talked about decentralization and leveling the playing field at the beginning. And one of the things that's always interested me about Bitcoin, I know you've been involved from near the beginning, is that there's a finite number of Bitcoin. And that seems like it's almost kind of building inequality into it, because if there's a finite number, doesn't that privilege early adopters? So how can you create a level playing field if you're just kind of, the wealth transfer is from the traditional people with money to now early adopters who are the new aristocracy? So how can you create a level playing field with that starting point? And then why is there a finite number of Bitcoin?
I'll take the easy question first, is why is there a finite supply? And that was just economically necessary to build a decentralized system. If there was not a finite supply, then eventually you'd need some sort of central bankers, central management, et cetera. And so from an engineering standpoint, having a finite supply that's modeled after natural resource extraction, specifically when you do coal mining, gold mining, first you make a ton out of the mine, the next year you get a little bit less, the next year you get a little bit less, until that mine is completely tapped out. And so that's a fairly familiar economic model. Bitcoin was built on that model. I won't pretend to have an answer to your better and wider question. Is in the early days, this model was built to incentivize keeping the system alive. So if you're an early adopter, you have the incentive to be an early adopter, because later on, Bitcoin price goes up, you benefit. But the downside is you get in later and you're not part of that earlier tribe. I will point out that one of the reasons why I won't say famous, but known, is because I've given away over 15,000 Bitcoins. That's about $100 million in today's money. And I am not standing in front of you a Bitcoin millionaire. It was, the familiar, my story is, you can make a 4x profit by selling in year 2. You miss out on the 1,000x profit later on. And so, I see a lot of my compatriots who are, 10 millionaire, 100 millionaire, et cetera. And, I did what was conservative and what was rational, and, but I missed out on that massive gain. And so, I look at it from, I'm not like Mr. Crypto Billionaire. I'm at the bottom of that rung, even though I'm a Bitcoin OG. And so I at least have some perspective of, people coming in, they're kind of at my level, because I sold out way, way early, that I see that unlevel potential playing field. But at the same time, from a technology perspective, I look at how empowering it is to control your own money versus someone else. And I think there's a lot of value just in that intrinsic aspect of I control it, not my bankers down the street.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Jeff Garzik and Mr. Sinclair Skinner.
All right. Let me just say. Let me also say this while Jeff is here. So, as a co-founder of BitMari, from the early days, Jeff has always been consistent and supportive of our project in Zimbabwe. My co-founder, Mr. Mapendera, being here. I think something we have to do in the Black community, though, is to have real, authentic, real relationships. We got to stop laughing at things that are not funny. We got to ask the real questions of each other. Again, when we hold ourselves accountable, now we need to hold everybody else accountable too, but we got to hold ourselves accountable. When we're in the rooms and we're having conversations, we need to ask those real questions. We're not going to, no one's coming to save us anyway. So whatever you thought by laughing at something or doing something uncomfortable that you didn't go along with, that's not helping anybody. So in a real way, we need to, and this is an example, but it's just a scratch on the surface. We all got to have real conversations about how do we solve these problems. Not everybody's going to be willing to come. Not everyone's going to be willing to say anything. Well, God bless them. You weren't going to get much from that anyway. But we got to take this space, this technology, even on this male-female thing. A sister came to me this morning, and she said, I was looking at the video, I didn't see any sisters there. And I looked at that video about a lot of times. I never thought, I said, well, the voice is a sister, but there wasn't a sister in there. My point is, I don't know how much, I won't call it courage, but how much conviction that sister had, but that was helpful because it made me think about it. Now, again, we can say, I should have thought about it, I should have this, or I should have that, but it was something that was very relevant to her, and she was willing to share. Now, again, we have to be that courage we're looking for in that regard. Our ancestors did the best they could with whatever they had. Now we have to do the next. We can't change the past. We're all living on the same rock. We got to figure this out. So in a real way, let's have real conversations with each other. It's okay. It might get a little uncomfortable sometimes, but the growth is like that. We're in a disruptive technology, but we have to disrupt the status quo that we're living in. So in a very real way, the challenging questions, like no one got shot. You know what I'm saying? And no one came in here. When we talking about startups and we talk about the liberation struggles in Africa, we say those struggles, they went out there with a great idea that we're going to get our country back, but a lot of folks didn't make it back that night. So even the courage I'm talking about is not some of the consequences that Harriet Tubman or, Shamor Michelle, Thomas Sankara. There's a lot of our ancestors that did some amazing startups that consequences were life and death. We can just ask great questions and actually engage people, hold ourselves and others accountable, and actually make outcomes. So we need to do a better job of that. And I hope through this vehicle, the Black Blockchain Summit, that we have real conversations with each other that we all can grow from. And to be able to, and one of the things, and this is not being chauvinistic, Jeff, but to be able to say, I don't have the answer. And that's, I'm not just, a lot of men are like that. We want to act like we know. And we don't know, and I have to work with you guys. And you guys cause a lot of problems. Just say you don't know. Look for help, and we won't be lost. But we've been driving around the same place, and you still acting like you know where you're going. So there's some things that we got to check in ourselves and our interactions so that we can actually make it a better place for all of us. So again, thank you so much and Jeff, thank you so much, and thanks for the amazing questions now.
All right.